Happy Sabbath. Greetings to all those that are listening online as well. Finding our favorites is an important part of growing up. You can think back to your first favorite. A lot of times kids, it's their favorite color. I can't even remember when I picked out my favorite color. I was probably 2 or 3. But then other things come along, like your favorite food, your favorite sports team, your favorite Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtle. All these are aspects of figuring out who you are. So today I'm going to talk about one of my favorite stories in the Bible. And the backdrop of this story is all about favorites. But it's kind of the wrong kind of favorite. The favorite child. And it begins with Jacob. And we also know him as Israel. He was the favorite of his dad, or of his mom, but not of his dad. Esau was the favorite of his dad. And it led to problems with Jacob. Esau and Jacob it caused so many problems with them that Esau wanted to kill Jacob in the end. And Jacob goes off and he marries 2 women. And again, he has a favorite. His favorite wife was Rachel, and Leah was kind of left off to herself. But Rachel couldn't have children. So Jacob has 10 children before Rachel has her first child. And then comes along the 11th child, Joseph. And again, Jacob has a favorite. This son Joseph is his favorite son. So let's turn to Genesis 37, verse 1. And today we're going to be reading the story of Joseph. And it's kind of a long story, so I'm going to have to skip from time to time. It actually goes throughout the rest of Genesis, kind of the story of Joseph. But let's start reading here in Genesis 37, verse 1. Now Jacob dwelt in the land where his father was a stranger, in the land of Canaan. This is the history of Jacob. Joseph, being 17 years old, was feeding the flock with his brothers. And the lad was with the sons of Bilhah and the sons of Zilpah, his father's wives. And Joseph brought a bad report of them to his father. Now Israel loved Joseph more than all his children because he was the son of his old age. Also he made him a tunic of many colors. But when his brothers saw that their father loved him more than all his brothers, they hated him and cannot speak peaceably to him. So this is it. This introduction, it's introduced as this is the history of Jacob. But Jacob's life, you're already 10 chapters into Jacob's life, so really this is the history of Jacob's family. It's really the defining story of the family of Israel. Joseph had given a bad report of the sons of Bilhah and Zilpah. These were the concubines of Jacob, and these would have been Dan, Gad, Naphtali, and Asher. And it just kind of says that in here. So this probably leads to some of the conflict that is about to unfold, and it plays a part in that conflict. It's clear to all that Jacob loved Joseph more than any of the other brothers. And they were reminded of this by just looking at Joseph and what he was wearing. He was wearing this tunic of many colors. That was a reminder that Joseph was the favorite. Let's continue reading in verse 5. Now Joseph had a dream, and he told it to his brothers, and they hated him even more. So he said to them, "Please hear this dream which I have dreamed. There we were, binding sheaves in the field. Then behold, my sheaf arose and stood upright, and indeed your sheaves stood all around and bowed down to my sheaf." And his brothers said to him, "Shall you indeed reign over us? Or shall you indeed have dominion over us?" So they hated him even more for his dreams and for his words. Then he dreamed still another dream, and he told it to his brothers and said, "Look, I have dreamed another dream, and this time the sun, the moon, and the 11 stars bowed down to me." So he told it to his father and his brothers, and his father rebuked him and said to him, "What is this dream that you have dreamed? Shall your mother and I and your brothers indeed come to bow down to the earth before you?" And his brothers envied him, but his father kept the matter in mind. So Joseph has 2 dreams, and both of these dreams are prophetic. And the brothers and father both recognized what the interpretations of these dreams were. Joseph reigning over them, being over them, and they did not like this. And it says that the brothers hated him even more. And it even says that Jacob rebuked him. So these 2 dreams, they are similar but different. And I believe that they both represent 2 different events. The first dream does not specify a number of sheaves bowing down. It just says that the brothers' sheaves bowed to his. So at this stage, the younger brother, we don't know how young he would have been, but he wouldn't have been with all the other brothers out in the fields. So when it says brothers in Genesis 37, a lot of times it probably doesn't mean that Benjamin is included as part of these brothers. So Benjamin is likely not a part of this first dream. And these sheaves representing grain are central to the fulfillment of this first dream. The second dream clearly indicates that Benjamin is present. You have 11 stars and the sun and the moon. All of these are kind of fulfilled by Benjamin's presence. Because Rachel, who would have probably represented the moon in this, she was already dead. So Benjamin would have been her only other son, and he would have represented her. Likewise, Jacob probably being represented by the sun, he would have been represented by all his offspring as well, including Benjamin, male offspring. So Benjamin is central to the fulfillment of this second dream. So these dreams are very important to the story. Everything in these dreams, everything in the story of Joseph is kind of leading up to the fulfillment of these dreams. So let's drop down to verse 18. Now when they saw him afar off, now Joseph is out looking for his brothers, because Jacob had told him to go out look for them. They're out shepherding sheep. Even before he came near, they conspired against him to kill him. Then they said to one another, "Look, this dreamer is coming. Come, therefore, let us now kill him and cast him into some pit, and we shall say, some wild beast has devoured him. We shall see what will become of his dreams." But Reuben heard it, and he delivered him out of their hands and said, "Let us not kill him." And Reuben said to them, "Shed no blood, but cast him into this pit which is in the wilderness, and do not lay a hand on him, that he might deliver him out of their hands and bring him back to his father." So it came to pass, when Joseph had come to his brothers, they stripped Joseph of his tunic, the tunic of many colors that was on him. Then they took him and cast him into a pit, and the pit was empty. There was no water in it. And they sat down to eat a meal. Then they lifted their eyes and looked, and there was a company of Ishmaelites coming from Gilead with their camels, bearing spices, balm, and myrrh, on their way to carry them down to Egypt. So Judah said to his brothers, "What profit is there if we kill our brother and conceal his blood? Come and let us sell him to the Ishmaelites, and let not our hand be upon him, for he is our brother and our flesh." And his brothers listened. The Midianite traders passed by, so the brothers pulled Joseph up and lifted him up out of the pit, and sold him to the Ishmaelites for 10 shekels of silver, and they took Joseph to Egypt. Then Reuben returned to the pit, and indeed Joseph was not in the pit, and he tore his clothes, and he returned to his brothers and said, "The lad is no more, and where shall I go?" So they took Joseph's tunic, killed a kid of the goats, and dipped the tunic in the blood. Then they sent the tunic of many colors, and they brought it to their father and said, "We have found this. Do you know whether it is your son's tunic or not?" And he recognized it and said, "It is my son's tunic. A wild beast has devoured him." Without doubt, Joseph is torn to pieces. Then Jacob tore his clothes, put sackcloth on his waist, and mourned for his son many days. And all his sons and all his daughters arose to comfort him. But he refused to be comforted, and he said, "For I shall go down into the grave to my son in mourning." Thus his father wept for him. Now the Midianites had sold him in Egypt to Potiphar, an officer of Pharaoh and captain of the guard. So this hatred boiled up so much to the point where they wanted to kill Joseph. But Reuben intercedes. But he's not blameless. He does command them to throw him into a pit. And we can't be sure why he decided to throw him in a pit, but perhaps it was part of this bad report. Somehow they had already done something that had incriminated themselves. Maybe Joseph already recognized that they wanted to kill him, and they had to deal with this. They couldn't afford another bad report. Anyways, Reuben leaves. We don't get a story as to why he left, but Judah has the idea to make a buck while Reuben's gone, and he sells Joseph into slavery. And they take this coat or this tunic of many colors, strip it from Joseph, and they put blood on it to convince their father that he had been killed by a wild animal. So Jacob has this bitter grief over his son, and when you see Jacob, the next part of the story that actually mentions Jacob, it's 20 years later, and he's still grieving. So his brothers would have had this guilt through all this time that would have passed. They would have been reminded of this guilt by the grief of their father. So Joseph is sold as a slave in Egypt to Potiphar, a captain in the guard of the Pharaoh. So he would have been kind of a ranking official. And God blesses Joseph. And Potiphar gives him authority over his household. So despite this slavery, Joseph is still elevated. We have to remember that Joseph is all alone here in Egypt. He's probably the only God worshiper in all of Egypt. But he stays true to God's standard. Let's continue reading in Genesis 39, verse 7. Genesis 39, verse 7. "And it came to pass after these things that his master's wife," this would have been Potiphar's wife, "cast longing eyes on Joseph, and she said, 'Lie with me.' But he refused and said to his master's wife, 'Look, my master does not know what is with me in the house, and he has committed all that he has to my hand. There is no one greater in this house than I, nor has he kept back anything from me but you, because you are his wife. How then can I do this great wickedness and sin against God. So it was, as she spoke to Joseph day by day, that he did not heed her, to lie with her, or to be with her. But it happened about this time when Joseph went into the house to do his work, and none of the men of the house was inside, that she caught him by his garment, saying, "Lie with me." But he left his garment in her hand and fled and ran outside. So earlier it says that Joseph is attractive, and Potiphar's wife is attracted to him and wants to sleep with him. And he refuses her. He says, not only is this a sin against my master, but this is a sin against God. We have to remember that they didn't have Moses' law at this time. This would have preceded Moses. But that doesn't mean that they didn't know God and they didn't know what was right and wrong. Clearly, he knew what sin was. And Joseph was a righteous individual. But Potiphar's wife proceeds to convince everybody that he was trying to sleep with her. So Potiphar throws Joseph in jail. Again, you see his garment come into play. His clothing is again used as evidence. This time as evidence of him doing something that he didn't do. And you'll see a lot in this story. You saw it with the dreams. You see these batches of two things playing out. So Joseph had two dreams, and now you have two instances where his garment is removed. And it's a part of his kind of demotion process of him going from this beloved son to slave to now prisoner. But even in prison, he gains favor with the prison keeper. And he's given authority over the rest of the prisoners. Everything that Joseph is put in Joseph's care throughout this story prospers. And you've got to think that some of it is God's blessing, but also some of it is God's gift. He had a great gift of administration. And again, we see another batch of two. We see these two officials of Pharaoh that are thrown into prison with Joseph, the chief butler and the chief baker. And these two individuals each have a dream. So there's two dreams, and they're troubled by their dreams. And when Joseph learns about these dreams, he says, "Do not interpretations belong to God? Tell them to me, please." So they tell him their dreams, and he interprets their dreams. And the events unfold exactly how Joseph interprets them. The chief butler is restored to his position, and the chief baker is executed. So Joseph says to the chief butler, "Remember me." But he doesn't. Well, he doesn't until 2 years later. Fast forward 2 years, Pharaoh has two dreams. This is the third and final set of a pair of dreams in this story. And none of the Pharaoh's wise men can interpret these dreams. And the chief butler says, "Oh, I remember a guy in prison. He interpreted my dream, and it turned exactly how he had said." So let's continue the story in Genesis 41, verse 14. 41, verse 14. Then Pharaoh sent and called Joseph, and they brought him quickly out of the dungeon. And he shaved, changed his clothing, and came to Pharaoh. So Joseph changes his clothes, and he shaves his head as he comes to Pharaoh, which would have it may have been something that was required, we don't know, or it may have been something that Joseph was aware of, that this would make him conform to the practices of the Egyptians. But we do see that in a lot of this story that Joseph is adapting to the cultures of the Egyptians, and especially with his clothing and his looks. And again, during this rise, we see that he's putting on clothing instead of losing clothing. So Pharaoh proceeds to tell his dream about the fat cows and the ugly cows and the good stalks and the withered stalks. And we'll drop down to verse 25 where Joseph interprets this dream. Then Joseph said to Pharaoh, "The dreams of Pharaoh are one. God has shown Pharaoh what he is about to do. The 7 good cows are 7 years, and the 7 good heads are 7 years. The dreams are one. The 7 thin and ugly cows which came up after them are 7 years, and the 7 empty heads blighted by the east wind are 7 years of famine. This is the thing which I have spoken to Pharaoh. God has shown Pharaoh what he is about to do. Indeed, 7 years of great plenty will come throughout all the land of Egypt. But after them 7 years of famine will arise, and all the plenty will be forgotten in the land of Egypt, and the famine will deplete the land. So the plenty will not be known in the land because of the famine following, for it will be severe." And the dream was repeated to Pharaoh twice, because the thing is established by God, and God will shortly bring it to pass. So despite Joseph's misfortunes, he never doubts God. In this interpretation of Pharaoh's dream, Joseph is very careful to give God the credit. Before he even tells the dream to Pharaoh, he says, God will give an answer of peace. And while he's giving the interpretation, twice he said, God has shown Pharaoh what he is about to do. And then he says, the thing is established by God, and God will surely bring it to pass. As we continue reading, Joseph is kind of bold to Pharaoh, and he gives Pharaoh recommendations. He says, choose a wise and discerning man to administer the gathering of this grain during these years of plenty, so that you have reserves in the time of famine. And Pharaoh and the servants say, can we find such a man as this, a man whom is the Spirit of God? So Joseph is given the leadership position. He's second to Pharaoh. It's this unlikely rise from prisoner all the way up to being second to Pharaoh. But this rise is an indication that God is in control of the events that are unfolding here. And as he's promoted, again, it says that he's clothed in garments of fine linen and put a gold chain around his neck. So, again, we see clothing being used as part of kind of this restoration process. First, before he came to Pharaoh, and now after. Clothing is being put on him. So again, you kind of get these pairs of things. And Joseph is given an Egyptian name, an Egyptian wife, Asenath, daughter of an Egyptian priest. And he has 2 sons by her, which is another pair in this story. So Joseph, in many ways, is fully embedded in the Egyptian culture. But we don't see any indication throughout this story that this affects his relationship with God. So again, Joseph proves to be an excellent administrator. These years of plenty pass, and he collects a bunch of grain and stores them in the storehouses. Now the famine has come, and he's distributing this grain. And it says that all countries came to Joseph in Egypt to buy grain because this famine was severe in all the lands. Let's pick up the story in Genesis 42, verse 1. When Jacob saw that there was grain in Egypt, Jacob said to his sons, "Why do you look at one another?" And he said, "Indeed, I have heard that there is grain in Egypt. Go down to that place and buy for us there, that we may live and not die." So Joseph's 10 brothers went down to buy grain in Egypt. But Jacob did not send Joseph's brother Benjamin with his brothers, for he said, "Lest some calamity befall him." And the sons of Israel went to buy grain among those who journeyed, for the famine was in the land of Canaan. So 20 plus years had passed, and we can see that Jacob is still coping with the loss of Joseph, because he's very protective of Benjamin, who would have been the last son of Rachel, his beloved wife. So only 10 sons go to Egypt to get grain. So verse 6. Now Joseph was governor over the land, and it was he who sold to all the people of the land. And Joseph's brothers came and bowed down before him with their faces to the earth. Joseph saw his brothers and recognized them, but he acted as a stranger to them and spoke roughly to them. Then he said to them, "Where do you come from?" And they said, "From the land of Canaan to buy food." So Joseph recognized his brothers, but they did not recognize him. Then Joseph remembered the dreams which he had dreamed about them, and said to them, "You are spies. You have come to see the nakedness of the land." So we see that they didn't recognize Joseph. He would have looked like an Egyptian, but he recognized them. So it kind of creates this interesting dynamic where Joseph knows more than them throughout this story. And he remembers his dreams. And part of that is the fact that the first dream is kind of being played out right here. This is likely the fulfillment of the event of the sheaves bowing down to his. Because remember, that dream likely didn't include Benjamin. Benjamin wouldn't have been out in the field with all of them at that time. Let's continue in verse 10. And they said to him, "No, my lord, but your servants have come to buy food. We are all one man's sons. We are honest men. Your servants are not spies." But he said to them, "No, but you have come to see the nakedness of the land." And they said, "Your servants are 12 brothers, the sons of one man in the land of Canaan. And in fact, the youngest is with our father today, and one is no more." But Joseph said to them, "It is as I spoke to you, saying, 'You are spies.' In this manner you shall be tested. By the life of Pharaoh, you shall not leave this place unless your youngest brother comes here. Send one of you, and let him bring your brother, and you shall be kept in prison, that your words may be tested to see whether there is any truth in you, or else by the life of Pharaoh, surely you are spies." So he put them all together in prison 3 days. Then Joseph said to them the third day, "Do this and live, for I fear God. If you are honest men, let one of your brothers be confined to your prison house. But you go and carry grain for the famine of your houses, and bring your youngest brother to me, so your words will be verified, and you shall not die." And they did so. Then they said to one another, "We are truly guilty concerning our brother, for we saw the anguish of his soul when he pleaded with us, and we would not hear. Therefore this distress has come upon us." And Reuben answered them, saying, "Did I not speak to you, saying, 'Do not sin against the boy'? And you would not listen. Therefore, behold, his blood is now required of us. But they did not know that Joseph understood them, for he spoke to them through an interpreter. And he turned himself away from them and wept. Then he returned to them again and talked with them. And he took Simeon from them and bound him before their eyes. So it's clear that the second dream here is not fulfilled. Benjamin, who would have been central to the fulfillment of that second dream, is not present. And Joseph is rough with them. He accuses them of being spies. And you could think that maybe this is out of vengeance that he's doing this. But I think he believes he has a role in fulfilling this second dream. And we can see this by his focus on getting Benjamin there. And he's using even extreme tactics to make this happen. We can see that this mistake that the brothers had with Joseph many years back, would have been 20 years back, is still weighing on them. They're blaming this event on that mistake. And it would seem unrelated, but if only they knew. And it was difficult for Joseph to hold back his emotions. And he hides himself so they don't see that he's getting emotional about this conversation. So the brothers go back to Canaan. They open their bags of grain, and they see money in the sacks. Joseph put it there. And their hearts just drop. He thought we were spies earlier. Now he's going to think we're thieves. And they tell Jacob this story. And they tell him, we need to bring Benjamin back. And Jacob refuses. And Reuben even goes to offer the life of his two sons as collateral. But Jacob is still unwilling. He just considers Simeon another lost son. Anyways, the famine continues to be bad, and they run out of grain. And Jacob again says, go back to Egypt. And Judah now refuses because they need Benjamin to go back. And you have this back and forth between Judah and Jacob. And Jacob blames them for even telling them about Benjamin. And Judah's response is, he asked pointedly about our family. Could we have possibly known what he would say, that he would tell us to bring back our younger brother? So anyways, Judah gives assurance that he will keep Benjamin safe. And Jacob finally gives in. And Jacob says, if I am bereaved, I am bereaved. So they gather up some gifts from their land to kind of gain favor. And they head back, and they get there, and they're immediately taken into Joseph's house. And they're worried. They would think, they were hoping to get in and get out. And they were just wondering, why in the world is this man taking so much interest in us? Anyways, they're worried about the money as well. And the steward assures that we received your money. So let's pick up the story in Genesis 43, verse 26. And when Joseph came home, they brought him the present which was in their hand into the house and bowed before him to the earth. So they all bowed down to him. This would have included Benjamin. At this juncture, the second dream would have been fulfilled. Verse 27. Then he asked them about their well-being and said, is your father well? The old man of whom you spoke, is he still alive? And they answered, your servant, our father, is in good health. He is still alive. And they bowed their heads down and prostrated themselves. Then he lifted his eyes and saw his brother Benjamin, his mother's son, and said, is this your younger brother of whom you spoke to me? And he said, God be gracious to you, my son. Now his heart yearned for his brother. So Joseph made haste and sought somewhere to weep. And he went into his chamber and wept there. Then he washed his face and came out, and he restrained himself and said, "Serve the bread." So they set him a place by himself, and them by themselves, and the Egyptians who ate with him by themselves, because the Egyptians could not eat food with the Hebrews, for that is an abomination to the Egyptians. And they sat before him, the firstborn according to his birthright, and the youngest according to his youth. And the men looked in astonishment at one another. Then he took servings to them before him, but Benjamin's serving was 5 times as much as any of theirs. So they drank and were merry with him. So the second dream is fulfilled, and it's got to be weighing on Joseph about when he is going to reveal himself. And Joseph is emotional in all this. And seeing his full brother, who he hadn't seen, who would have been probably pretty young at the time that he was sold into slavery, really kind of brings out these emotions. So as they sit down to eat, we see several oddities. And it almost seems like he wants his brothers to notice him, wants them to reveal himself. And some of the first oddity is that there are 3 tables set up. One for the brothers, one for Joseph, and one for the Egyptians. And it says that it was an abomination for the Egyptians to eat with the Hebrews. So even Joseph didn't sit with them. And which to me would be really weird, because Joseph was second in all the land. So maybe Joseph was somehow enforcing this kind of role to not offend. And maybe this is a sign of Joseph's cultural awareness. The second oddity is that he sat them in order from oldest to youngest. They would have been older at this time. It would have been really hard to distinguish their ages. And they were astonished by this, because it was almost like this person knew them. And third, he gives Benjamin 5 times the portions. So he's showing favor to Benjamin. But why? Well, because Benjamin was the son of his mother. He was his full brother. And Benjamin probably wasn't involved with selling him into slavery. So he was trying to poke them to see. But they didn't. Anyways, they all seems well as they're leaving. They're heading back to Canaan. Joseph kind of leaves a gift with them as they're heading back to Canaan. He puts a silver cup in his brother Benjamin's sack of grain. And he's going to use this as a tool to incriminate Benjamin and test his brothers. Anyways, Joseph's steward catches up to them, and he blames them of stealing the cup. And the brothers are really not prepared for what's about to happen. Let's continue reading in Genesis 44, verse 9. With whomever of your servants it is found, let him die, and we also will be my Lord's slaves. So this is the brothers saying this. They're saying, we didn't do it. And the steward said, now also let it be according to your words. He with whom it is found shall be my slave, and you shall be blameless. Then each man speedily let down his sack to the ground, and each opened his sack. So he searched. He began with the oldest and left off with the youngest. And the cup was found in Benjamin's sack. This would have been just the worst possible outcome for the brothers. Their hearts must have just sunk as a result of this. And in verse 13 it says, Then they tore their clothes, and each man loaded his donkey and returned to the city. So Judah and his brothers came to Joseph's house and he was still there, and they fell before him on the ground. So this is the second time that the brothers, including Benjamin, bow down before him. This time they're falling down before him, begging. So this is another batch of two. Verse 15. And Joseph said to them, "What deed is this you have done? Did you not know that such a man as I can certainly practice divination?" Then Judah said, "What shall we say to my Lord? What shall we speak? Or how shall we clear ourselves? God has found out the iniquity of your servants. Here we are, my Lord's slaves, both we and he also, with whom the cup was found." But he said, "Far be it from me that I should do so. The man in whose hand the cup was found, he shall be my slave. And as for you, go up in peace to your father." Then Judah came near to him and said, "O my Lord, please let your servant speak a word in my Lord's hearing. And do not let your anger burn against your servant, for you are even like Pharaoh." My Lord asked his servants, saying, "Have you a father or a brother?" And we said to my Lord, "We have a father, an old man, and a child of his old age, who is young. His brother is dead, and he alone is left of his mother's children, and his father loves him." Then you said to your servants, "Bring him down to me, that I may set my eyes on him." And we said to my Lord, "The lad cannot leave his father, for if he should leave his father would die." But you said to your servants, "Unless your youngest brother comes down with you, you shall see my face no more." So it was, when we went up to your servant my father, that we told him the words of my Lord. And our father said, "Go back and buy us a little food." But we said, "We cannot go down. If our younger brother is with us, then we will go down. For we may not see the man's face unless our younger brother is with us." Then your servant my father said to us, "You know that my wife bore me 2 sons, and the one went out from me, and I said, 'Surely he is torn to pieces,' and I have not seen him since. But if you take this one also from me, and calamity befalls him, you shall bring down my gray hair with sorrow to the grave. Now therefore, when I come to your servant my father, and the lad is not with us, since his life is bound up in the lad's life, it will happen when he sees the lad is not with us, that he will die. So your servants will bring down the gray hair of your servant, our father, with sorrow to the grave." For your servant became surety for the lad to my father, saying, "If I do not bring him back to you, then I shall bear the blame before my father forever. Now therefore, please let your servant remain instead of the lad as a slave to my Lord, and let the lad go up with his brothers. For how shall I go up to my father if the lad is not with me? Lest perhaps I see the evil that would come upon my father." So we have to remember that it was Judah's idea to sell Joseph to the slave traders. And now he is willing to sacrifice himself, his own freedom, so that Benjamin can go free. Let's read Genesis 45, verse 1. Then Joseph could not restrain himself before all those who stood by him, and he cried out, "Make everyone go out from me." So no one stood with him while Joseph made himself known to his brothers. And he wept aloud, and the Egyptians in the house of Pharaoh heard it. Then Joseph said to his brothers, "I am Joseph. Does my father still live?" But his brothers could not answer him, for they were dismayed in his presence. And Joseph said to his brothers, "Please come near to me." So they came near. Then he said, I am Joseph, your brother, whom you sold into Egypt. But now, do not therefore be grieved or angry with yourselves, because you sold me here. For God sent me before you to preserve life. For these 2 years the famine has been in the land, and there are still 5 years in which there will be neither plowing nor harvesting. And God sent me before you to preserve a posterity for you in the earth, and to save your lives by a great deliverance. So now it was not you who sent me here, but God. And he has made me a father to Pharaoh, and the Lord of all his house, and a ruler throughout all the land of Egypt. Hurry and go up to my father, and say to him, Thus says your son Joseph, God has made me Lord of all Egypt. Come down to me, do not tarry. So Joseph finally reveals himself to all his brothers. And they're just speechless. And it even says that they are dismayed. It's hard to imagine the complicated emotions they must have felt at that time. First, they would have been shocked, like they wouldn't have believed it. And then they would have felt shameful. This is the brother we sold into slavery. And all that guilt from all those years would have come back to them. And then they would have felt worry. What is he going to do to us? And then they would have felt joy. He's alive. We can tell our Father that he's alive. It would have been an adjustment in how they viewed this Egyptian administrator, who would have kind of seemed like their enemy. And then learn that he was actually the brother that they had sold into slavery. But Joseph assures them that he means them no harm. The events that played out exactly according to God's design. And yes, Joseph was kind of a participant in this process. He tests his brothers. But never do we see that his intentions seem to be vengeful. Even later, when Jacob is dying, the brothers are still worried that he's going to get them back. And Joseph is like, I never meant that against you. I never felt that way. If Joseph had never tested his brothers, they would have never had the chance for redemption that they had, because they had changed. And you can see this in Judah's willingness to give up his own freedom for Benjamin's. As the story continues, we see that Joseph, once again, is a great administrator. And his next administration project is organizing everything so his family can move back into Egypt, into the land of Goshen, which is considered the best land of Egypt. And he gathers up all these carts, and he sends them back to Canaan, and this is probably one of the most exciting parts of the story, telling his father that Joseph is alive. So let's read that in Genesis 45, verse 25. Then they went up out of Egypt and came to the land of Canaan, to Jacob their father. And they told him, saying, Joseph is still alive, and he is governor over all the land of Egypt. And Jacob's heart stood still, because he did not believe them. But when they told him all the words which Joseph had said to them, and when he saw the carts which Joseph had sent to carry him, the spirit of Jacob their father revived. Then Israel said, It is enough. Joseph, my son, is still alive. I will go and see him before I die. So it's hard to imagine a father's joy of thinking this son was dead and him being alive. And it says that Jacob was revived. And it kind of brings you back to his words when he learned or saw the coat with the blood on it, and he thought that Joseph was dead. He said, "For I shall go down into the grave to my son in mourning." Jacob's mourning had been 22 years, but now he would go to see his son. The stories of the Bible are there for a reason. And there are many lessons that we can draw from this story, the story of Joseph. So, kind of in conclusion, I'm going to go down through some of the lessons that we can learn from this story. Lesson 1, God is in control. These events not only affected one country, but they affected many countries. And it makes you wonder, when did this all occur? Because it would have had kind of macro impacts on society. This would have probably been the beginning of a major rise in Egyptian power and influence. Because these events affected the whole world. And it was all kind of a device to impact this family. This family that would become the nation of Israel. A broken family. A broken family that needed redemption. That needed put back together again. And that's exactly what God did. And sometimes it's hard to see why the events are playing out, why the way they are when they do. And you might ask yourself, why is God doing this? Why is he allowing this? But he is there. He is in control, even down to the minute details. Lesson 2, we can adapt, but we should never compromise. Joseph is a model of how we can be in this world, but not of the world. Because the land of Egypt was a pagan land. He would have been the lone worshiper of God in the whole country. It would have been hard to feel that alone. And sometimes we may feel alone because we do have different beliefs. We do things differently. We don't celebrate Christmas. We have to talk to our teachers about getting off school for the Feast of Tabernacles. That makes us different. But at least there are people of God around us. There are many people that worship God and Jesus Christ. Joseph didn't even have that. But he didn't make us think about it. He adapted. But he always put God first. And Joseph's honesty, his character, his loyalty, these all made him valuable to his unbelieving masters. He was a light. He showed that living God's way has both natural and supernatural blessings to them. So it's okay to adapt, but never at the expense of God and his way. Third, God wants reconciliation, and God wants redemption. This is a story of reconciliation and redemption. Joseph and his brothers were kind of torn apart, and it's a story of them being reconciled back together. And there's a lot of pain in this process, but they got there. Much of our journey is also about reconciliation. Reconciliation with fellow man and reconciliation with God. We might make mistakes, but God will pick us up. He leads us, and we need to follow his lead. And fourth and lastly, and it goes back to my introduction, child favoritism leads to problems. It's safe to say that Judah's greed, his willingness to sell his brother into slavery, was wrong, right? Even if it worked out in the end, it didn't justify it. And the same goes for Jacob's child favoritism. And I've had conversations with people about this that actually took the other side. And their stance was, well, the patriarchs did it. It all worked out for them. Did it? Did it really work out for them? Did you not see the destructive force it had on these families? Learn the lesson. Be fair with your children. Avoid choosing favorites. Don't pin them against each other. And love them all.